It seems a ridiculous notion that you could drown in shallow water, especially after you have survived the deep. It seems strange that you could drown in something that you could handle. There are some concepts, I just pulled a few, that will keep you from drowning in shallow water. And you might want to jot these down. Don't take the presence of the storm to indicate the absence of God. I'm not talking about the storms that rain down water and the lightning and the thunder and all of that. I'm talking about storms that other people can't see. Because you get up out of the bed every morning and you put your hair up and put your makeup on and they don't know you put your smile on just like you did your makeup, and because you are going through a secret storm. And when we get in a storm, we have a tendency to wonder, where is God? Because we buy into this notion that if God was with us, we would have no storm. That if God were really with us, everything would go smoothly. How could God be with us and we have cancer? How could my house be on fire if God be with me? I looked for him. I didn't see him. I looked in front of me. I thought he'd lead the way. I didn't see him. But you cannot see in a storm. That's why he told you to walk by faith and not by sight. In fact, if you really want to see God do his best work, get in trouble. I know you think God does his best work when you're dancing in the church and you're raising your hand and all of that stuff. No. The Bible said he is a very, very present help in the time of trouble. If you're looking for God, he's in the storm. He is with you in the storm. He promised. You never promise the obvious. You give a promise when you know that something is going to come to make you doubt. Whenever God promises you something, he says, you may not have it in your sensual realm right now, but I promise you. Did he promise you anything? You don't steer through the storm based on the conditions of the storm. You steer through the storm based on the solidarity of your faith and understand that this too shall pass. I don't have no details, but I am coming out of this. I wish I had some faith in this room. You ought to make a declaration right now that the devil can hear. I am coming out of this. The storm has started. I don't know what all I'm going to have to go through, but let's set a pin on the end of it and say, I shall come forth as pure gold. I may have to wait. I may have to hold my peace, but when everything is said and done, I will come out of this. Because he's with me. He's with me. He is with me in the storm. Let's settle on that. He is with me in the storm. I don't know whether you're with me. I don't know whether you're with me, but let's settle this much right now. I know I got at least one passenger. The Lord is with me in the storm.
Pull yourself together and quit tripping because you in the process. God is processing you. He ain't through with you. He gonna fix it. Let me tell you this right here. Why are you tripping? I look back on my life at all that I've been through. I have built up enough reservoir that living in the car taught me that this ain't it. So the things I'm going through now, I know this ain't it. That he gonna come get me in a minute.
There are times in life we can feel overwhelmed, like the pressure's too much. A lady told me how things had come against her at work, and she said, I can't take it anymore. The worry, the stress, the demands, it's too much to handle. But Paul said in 1 Corinthians, God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted with more than you can bear. Paul was saying, God will not let you face more pressure than you can handle. When an architect designs a building, a big skyscraper, he doesn't just design the outside. That's important, but it's of no use if he doesn't design the inner structure. How much wind it will face, how much equipment will be on it, how deep the piers in the ground, how thick the foundation. The architect specifically designs each structure so it can withstand the pressure. The good news is your architect is the Most High God. When He laid out the plan for your life, He calculated everything you would face. He took into account every hurt, every injustice, every mistake, and He designed your beams big enough. He put in you the determination, the stamina, that no matter what comes against you, it will not be too much to bear. You've been designed to withstand the storms, designed to endure until the dream comes to pass. You may not be able to see it, but your walls are strong enough. Your foundation is deep enough. You can bear whatever comes your way. He didn't forget about what environment you'd be in, what conditions you would face. Nothing you face will cause you to collapse under the weight. You need to remind yourself, I've been designed to withstand. I am determined enough. I'm strong enough. I am well able. Now, an architect doesn't wait till the pressure comes. He doesn't wait till the middle of the storm to decide what kind of structure to build. It's designed before one concrete truck shows up. The specs are studied, calculated, and approved before construction ever begins. Before you were formed in your mother's womb, your specs were carefully designed. When you face big challenges, that means you have strong infrastructure. You don't really know what's in you until you wait on you. When something happens that we've never faced, it's easy to think, I can't handle this. The truth is, you wouldn't be facing it unless you could handle it. The very fact that it happened is a sign that you are well able. It wasn't a surprise to your architect. He knew ahead of time. He took into account winds that you never knew you would encounter. Nothing you face will cause you to collapse. You've been designed to withstand. In your thinking, you can give in and think, this is too much. I can't handle it. That's why the scripture tells us, don't faint in your mind. You are well able. No weapon formed against you is going to prosper. That difficulty didn't come to stay. It came to pass. The psalmist said, you have been fearfully and wonderfully made. It's not just talking about the outside. That's talking about your specs as well, your infrastructure, how God designed things that you can't see. Things you would think would cause you to collapse, but out of nowhere, strength rises up. A determination to stand strong and outlast the opposition. You may think you've reached your limits. You've been at that same level a long time. Can I encourage you? You have more floors in you. You've gotten comfortable carrying this much weight. It's no problem. If you could see the plans God has for you, you would notice your beams are much bigger than what you're carrying right now. And with that increase comes more weight. You're going to have more pressure. This is pressure that makes you stretch, makes you grow. Not just difficulties, but positive pressure, where you discover you can handle things that you never thought you could handle. What am I saying? You've been designed for everything you're going to face. When you come into things that seem too hard, that should cause you to collapse, don't worry. God knew they were coming. He already made your beams big enough. Now, it may be uncomfortable. You may have to stretch, but that pressure is not going to stop you. Whatever is in your future, you have the grace to handle it. Now, the key is don't lose the battle in your mind. Your mind will say it's too much. I might believe you if your architect lived down the street. If your architect worked for a firm downtown, he could make a mistake. Your architect is the God who spoke worlds into existence. He doesn't miscalculate. You will never face a situation that you're not designed for.
Because you see, life is like a voyage. Sometimes the sea is calm. Sometimes the wind blows softly. Sometimes the sun is shining. Thank God for those times. Maybe that's where you are right now, just sailing along. And if you are, enjoy it. It's a gift of God. But sometimes the wind rises. Sometimes the sky darkens. Sometimes we find ourselves in the midst of a terrible storm. And that's the way life is.
Maybe you're in a storm. You didn't plan on it. It was completely unexpected. But you're in the middle of it, and you're wondering if you'll survive. Could be a physical storm. Maybe it's a relational storm with your spouse, your kids, your parents, or a friend. The relationship that meant so much to you is now in deep trouble. Maybe your financial boat is getting rocked by heavy waves. You're sinking deeper and deeper in debt and wondering if you'll ever be able to get your head above water again. Maybe it's an emotional storm. For you, the storm is internal. You're fighting a battle no one else can see with depression, anxiety, or fear. You're in a storm. In Matthew chapter 8, the disciples found themselves in a literal storm on the Sea of Galilee. We pick it up in verse 23. Then Jesus got into the boat and his disciples followed him. Without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. Now, before we even really start the story, I have to share with you an important fact. The disciples followed Jesus into that boat. If you go back to verse 18, you read this. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. It was Jesus' plan. It was Jesus' idea to be in that boat on that sea at that time. This may be the most important thing you learn today. Storms come even when you're following Jesus. If you're in a storm and you're wondering where you went wrong, I want to encourage you. This storm doesn't necessarily mean you've missed God. Some storms are of your own making. But often, storms come even though you're following Jesus.
Being a Christian never exempts you from a storm. Don't think that because you have a tough time, you're disobeying God. The disciples got in this storm because they obeyed God. Jesus said, get in the boat. They got in the boat and sailed right into a storm. They were right in the center of God's will, but in the middle of a storm. So when you're going through a tough time, do not automatically assume I must be out of the will of God, because you might be exactly where God wants you to be. Storms are impartial.
These disciples were not out of the will of God. Why were they in a storm? They were in a storm. Don't miss this. They were in a storm because they were in the will of God. It was Jesus that constrained them to get into that boat. They were in this storm because they were obeying Jesus. Why would Jesus want them to be in a storm? Because he wanted them to grow. I want to ask you a question. Those of you who've been on the trail for a while, when did you grow the most? When everything was fine? When you were smoothly sailing? Or when the storm came?
And sometimes God allows very difficult situations in our life to do what? To grow us up. And I think that if God allows a storm in your life, that its ultimate purpose is to bring you out stronger.
You will learn things in storms that you will never learn any other way.
A calm sea never produced a good sailor. How would you like to go on the seas with a sailor who had never been on troubled seas? If you're going to have a good life, it means you're going to go through stuff. But the purpose of that stuff isn't to harm you. God allows it or causes it to grow you up, to grow me up.
And the lesson is that Jesus can be trusted in the storms of life. And the only way you're ever going to prove that truth is to go through them. That's it. If you'd never had a problem, you'd never know God could solve them.
It's God who is the master of the winds and the waves, and He's the one who causes storms to come. It is a shallow theology, a very shallow theology that says if we're in the will of God, that we're just going to sail always smoothly on the sea of life. No. Listen, we are going to have difficulty. And the first thing that you can say when difficulty comes is that God's providence is over it all. I am governed by His providence. God's wonderful plan is in effect. Now, God's plan is not to indulge you. God's plan is to enlarge you. Psalm 4, verse 1. Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress. Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress. I am growing by His plan.
The disciples didn't expect the storm. But now this group, several of them, by the way, expert fishermen, were fighting for their lives as the waves threatened to sink their boat. The disciples thought they weren't going to make it. Jesus was so disturbed by the storm that He was taking a nap. Well, the disciples panicked. Jesus slept. Here's why that's so encouraging. It lets you know Jesus isn't intimidated by your storm. To you, it seems impossible, unending, devastating. Jesus, on the other hand, isn't frightened by it in the least. They shifted their attention from the winds and the waves and the storm to Jesus. They recognized we can't handle this by ourselves. There's nothing we can do. We better wake up Jesus. When storms come, never forget, Jesus is in the boat with you. Jesus is in your boat.
Well, friend, maybe you're in a storm right now, like the disciples in this boat. Here's my question. Who's in the boat with you? It's Jesus. He's in our boat. He's in our life. And we would do well to remember who He is and what He can do. He still quiets storms, and He can quiet the heart of His child in the middle of a storm.
If you're going through a storm, the first lesson you got to learn is God is always with you if you're a believer. There will be nothing I will face or you the rest of our life alone. Jesus is in my boat. He's in there. He's in my life and in my boat. And if you're a believer, He's in your boat too. God promises every believer, lo, I am with you always. I will never leave you or forsake you. Isaiah 43, verse 1 and 2. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I'll be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. What a promise. If your boat's rocking, don't worry. If you're a believer, Jesus is in your boat. So remember God's closeness. He's still with you.
I understand you're in a storm, but you don't have to face that storm alone. Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. The one who created this world and the one who overcame death is in your boat. You don't have to fear the storm because Jesus is in your boat. I don't know how people face the storms of life without Jesus. Mark, in his telling the story, gives us Jesus' words. Jesus stood up in the boat. He arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. There are a lot of wind and waves around us. None of that knocks Jesus out of the boat. None of that intimidates Him. In the middle of it all, In spite of it all, you can turn to Jesus, and with just 3 words, peace, be still, Jesus can calm your storm. Jesus is not intimidated. He's not afraid. He's with you. He's in the boat. He can and will speak peace to you, even in the middle of your most terrifying storm.
Jesus expects you to trust Him in the storm. Regardless of your storm, Jesus is your solution. Jesus promises to bring you through your storm. Look at verse 35. On that day, when evening came, He said to them, "Let us go to the other side."
Jesus didn't tell them it'd be an easy trip. He didn't say they wouldn't get wet. He didn't say they wouldn't have an attack or be scared. He just says, we are going to the other side. And they did. You're going to make it. We're going to make it. And notice what Jesus said to the disciples in verse 26. You of little faith, why are you so afraid? Now that tells me 2 things. The root of their problem was fear, and the solution to their problem is faith. The greatest threat to the lives of the disciples was not the storm. It was their unbelief. The secret of victory over fear is faith. And even if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move a mountain. So you don't have to have super faith. You just have to have that little bit of faith in a great big God. That's the issue. See, everybody's got faith, but you don't have to have a bunch. You can put a little faith in a big God and get big results.
God can handle it. God's bigger than your storm.
I don't have to have the answer. I just know who does. I don't know. I know enough history to know He'll bring me through. I don't know how. I can't see it, but I know He'll bring me through. And so there's only one thing that can calm your storm, and that's Jesus. But you got to get Him in your boat. You got to get Him in your life. You got to have Jesus in your life to make it through the storms of life.
But listen to me carefully. Whenever you are in a storm, Jesus knows about it. He's close by, and He's waiting for you to ask for help. I'll never leave you nor forsake you is His promise. Think about that. Jesus has said to every one of us who are His children, I will never leave you nor forsake you.
You aren't alone. You aren't alone. We do not walk this road alone. That's why we can say with confidence, you'll survive this storm. You will. Because you're not alone. You belong to God. God has never promised a life with no problems. But God has promised to be there when we face them.
But storms are temporary. They don't last. There are no eternal storms. Mark Twain and a friend walked outside one day in a rainstorm. The friend said, you think it'll stop? Mark Twain said, always does. Always does. That's true with any storm. You got to go through it, but it won't last forever. You know, morning's coming. Maybe dark right now, but morning and the sun will shine again. Because some of you are in a major storm right now. And God's word to you is the sun will shine again. There is hope. God is with you.
Going to be happy totally, I think it was Osteen who said it's best that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. And I love that because I remove this belief that things are finite and limited, and they are not. If you want to be happy and successful, if no matter that there are 70,000 products, if that is your drama, if that's your calling, if that's your purpose, like you can do that. There's no cap on how many successful soccer players that can exist at the same time, or how many books are out in the world. There's no one stopping you, and that's the mindset that we are educated for, that security and green. And so what's the difference between the monkey minds and the monk minds? Yeah, I'm glad you brought that you out. So the monkey mind is what we experience on a day-to-day basis. The monkey mind is still riskless. The monkey mind